Hi there, my friend. I'm Peter Barron. Welcome to today's episode of the Independent School Moonshot Podcast. I'm really excited to welcome Marsh Rutledge back. She is the Director of Strategic Design and Innovation at SAIS. She also is kind enough to serve as an advisor to our Moonshot Lab members. So thank you for that, Ann Marsh. I really do appreciate it. We are going to have a conversation today about strategy, which many of you probably have figured out over the course of this podcast series that it is absolutely one of my favorite topics. So I'm excited to dig into it. I know Ann Marsh has done a lot of strategic work both at SAIS and at Mount Vernon School, and she was there leading their Mount Vernon Ventures program. So we're going to get into that in a little bit. But before we do, Ann Marsh, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Peter. It is always great to join you. I always love our conversations, and thanks for having me back.
Of course. And what people don't realize is like we were supposed to start recording this a half an hour ago, and we've already spent like a half an hour having a conversation. So that's just kind of how it goes. So I hopefully everybody will enjoy this one. But before we get going, Marsh, can you introduce yourself and SAIS?
Yeah, obviously, I am one of the newer folks at SAIS, but we're the Southern Association of Independent Schools. We represent about 400 member schools, not just in the southeastern United States, but now sort of nationally and even a few internationally as well. Accreditation, professional learning, resources, tools, benchmarking. And I am there newly since July as Director of Strategic Design and Innovation. And like you said before that, served as Executive Director of Mount Vernon Ventures, the consulting and R&D division at the Mount Vernon School. But I'm still obviously an educator at heart. Started teaching in the elementary school classroom years ago and came up as instructional coach, curriculum designer, learning specialist, all of the things. So my heart is still there as an educator, but have the amazing privilege to work with a lot of our school leaders now on strategy, which is one of my favorite topics as well as yours. So hence lots of our good connections.
You know, over the last however many years, you've had a chance to talk with lots of school leaders, both about the opportunities they see in the market, but also talking about some of the challenges that potentially they're facing right now. We're going to kind of dive into some of that deep a little bit later on in the episode, but you like to use this word signals, right? I see this word coming out of JS a lot. You know, I think it's the name of your newsletter.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to start there because I'd really love to understand from your perspective, like how do you define that, and why should school leaders be focused on signals?
Yeah. Well, I come from a long background in design thinking and then futures thinking, which is ultimately design thinking, just people-centered problem solving. So know that that's part of my definition. But the easy answer is that signals are just indicators of a future that might come. It's things that we can observe now that tell us a story about what might be in the future. And it could be anything, news headlines, data, trends, photos. Anything can be a signal. When we put them together, we can see these bigger trends or signals of consequence, we might call them, that really give us a direction and how we can adjust our strategies to be ready for a future that may or may not come to pass.
And one of the challenges that I hear a lot, and I don't think this isn't specific to independent schools. I think it's, it kind of traverses lots of different industries, is that there's this, I don't know, there's this tension of daily demand outweighing the ability to be strategic or really do that strategic thinking so that you can look at those patterns that you're seeing in the signals to understand, how might we adjust our strategy. So that said, like when you have to cut through the noise, what signals should leaders pay close attention to, because without getting drowned out by like the noise of the urgent, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, you're so right. I hear it all the time talking to our school leaders that balancing the daily demands with a strategy is one of the hardest things that they have to do. And, there are so many daily demands that I completely understand that. But, we're also having this time where there's so much change. And so some of the biggest signals that we see coming up as being really important for our future for independent schools, I think, are around faculty attrition, particularly retirement. We see a generation, we have a multi-generational workforce, but we see a generation of teachers who are ready to retire. And that's starting. We're seeing that in our faculty attrition data already, and it will only continue. So Faculty attrition, I think, is a huge one. And then with that also comes, we have so many new leaders. And so understanding what makes a good leader, what does a leader need to be now? What are the competencies for leadership in a time of uncertainty? And how do we inspire trust? That's something that you and I have talked about a lot. What does the head role entail today and in the future? So I think that's a big signal, especially as we bring in more and more younger heads or first time heads. Of course, AI we can't overlook. That is a signal of consequence. You and I have talked about it, but AI is an arrival technology, not an adoption technology. It's here to stay, and what we make of it in the future is still up to us, but is certainly a signal that we can't ignore. And then one you and I have talked about a lot too, this I think is really, really going to shape our trajectory in the next 10 or 15 years is declining birth rates. We're seeing fewer students, but more choices, especially with microschooling and homeschooling on the rise. Our independent schools have to reassess their business model and figure out what do we do with fewer students when there are so many choices available to parents.
When you do, I really appreciate all the survey work that you do with your members, and I just as much appreciate the fact that you share it with everybody. Like I think that I love those newsletters from you because there's always good data or whatever Brett Jacobson is posting.
Yeah.
Runs SAIS, like there's just great information in there. So when you look at that pulse survey, and we just went over, I don't know, maybe half a dozen different signals, like are those things, is the data coming out of your survey lining up with the signals that you're seeing out there in the market?
Yeah, absolutely. When we do the pulse perspectives, each month we're surveying a different role-based group or a different audience. So we just recently did, actually just for November, is our CFO and academic leaders. Both of those came out in October. We had heads of school. So throughout the year, we survey different groups, whether that's academic support or admissions, enrollment, development. Uh, so we're getting different pieces of the total perspective. Everybody sees something a little bit different from their vantage point, but the same trends, when you put all of that together, are coming out. We started doing some really interesting work. We're calling it Beyond the Pulse, but it's really just a further, deeper analysis of the pulse perspectives data and are disaggregating that data, particularly to look at trends when you separate out by enrollment size or geographical region or the location of school, urban, suburban, or rural. What are the differences that we're seeing in the data? And then what are the bigger trends so that we can figure out a true perspective of what's happening for our member schools? And that's been really interesting because while you see the big threads coming through strongly, you also see a ton of differences. And I think honestly, that's what makes the data so applicable for our member schools. They can look at where they fit in terms of their peer schools, what's different, and then ultimately use that data to help them figure out what do we do next.
Yeah, I mean, it's the aggregate data is great because you can see across an industry or across a region. But if you're a school sitting in a particular market with a certain set of circumstances, like it may not resonate. And so being able to disaggregate it that way is really powerful. And I think about some of the signals that you mentioned before, declining birth rates, obviously the talent challenges around attrition, retirement, whatnot. I don't know if we talked about rising costs, but certainly everything is getting
Certainly.
more expensive.
Yep,
So
that
if
was
you,
the number one thing that came out of our CFO Pulse perspective, that they were their biggest financial challenge was rising operational costs.
oh, I was just talking. So we're recording this in kind of early to mid-November, and I was giving a talk at a association back east to heads, CFOs, and trustees, and we were talking about rising costs. And I just put out there like, how many of you have seen increases in your healthcare premiums? And everybody's like, there was like a collective gasp of how much it's costing. So I really I think that makes a lot of sense to me. Um, but when you look at those and maybe others, like it doesn't have to be those three. I think we listed off some more as well. Like What do you think schools may be underestimating right now? Like, if there is there something in there that you're like, what we're seeing is you really need to pay attention to this.
Yeah, I think it's the declining birth rates, fewer students, because we still see some schools who say things like, but we have wait lists, or
Yep.
our market is really hot, or even though there's a lot of independent schools in our market, we're still at full enrollment. And while that's the case for those schools, it's not the trend that we're seeing overall. And so when their individual experience doesn't match the trend at all, at large, what we're seeing is people are just saying, well, we don't have to worry about that. But when you're being responsible for the long haul of your school's future and sustainability is so important, I think schools have to pay more attention to that, and they're underestimating it right now.
Yeah, I think that, I think that's a really interesting point, and it's one that I'm glad you made because I think what I have seen over my career is that if you're in a position of strength, like if your market is hot, like out here in Seattle, it was hot for a
Mhm.
long time. It's not so hot anymore, right? It's changed, right? A
Yeah.
lot of things have caused that change. But what you see sometimes is like when things are in abundance, maybe some of those kind of like competitive skills that you need when things are hard tend to atrophy.
Yeah.
So, like, even if you're in this period where things are really good, like, you still have to invest in, those characteristics that will allow you to persevere when things aren't. Because
Mhm.
the last thing you wanna do is to get to that place, things start to decline, and you're like, "I don't know what to do because we've just spent the last 5 years not investing in these areas." And it could be professional development, it could be program development, it could be any number of things, right? Like, there's lots of different things that go into it. But I think what I'm hearing from you is don't take it for granted. Like you constantly have to be building your program, building your skills in order to remain competitive when things start to level off.
Absolutely. I think that you're also hitting at a great point that for a long time there were a group of parents that just knew that they wanted a traditional independent school experience. And now what we're seeing is that parents want more and more differentiation. They're looking for more values based alignment. They're really looking for schools to be able to articulate who they are, what they stand for, the kind of learning that they can do, the cultural experience that they're going to have at that school with a level of sophistication that they would expect from any other brand that they are
Yeah.
purchasing from.
Yeah.
And that's just not what we previously saw. And, I think in some cases, our schools have done a great job at delivering that. And in some cases, they haven't. And so that would be definitely in this market when there are going to be fewer and fewer students being able to have done that foundational identity work. Who are we? What are we doing that makes us uncopyable by the school down the street? That's going to be essential.
Yeah. And how do you tell that story? Right.
Mhm.
I it's so fascinating that the values based piece is such a shift, right? If you look at Gen X, my generation, or my parents, baby boomers, a lot of it has been very kind of outcome driven.
Mhm.
Like we're looking for specific outcomes. And again, like I always, whenever I'm talking about this, I have to feel like I feel like I have to, say up front, like I really don't like lumping everybody together into one
Right.
big bucket, right? Like I know we all approach things differently, but from a strategic point of view, if you're thinking about it generationally, like there's a reason why on our websites, like if you're a high school, I guarantee there's going to be stats and figures about your school, teacher to student ratio, list of colleges that kids get in, like all that sort of stuff, because that's played really, really well. You know, like if you're a Gen X or a baby boomer, like you're looking for those things. But what you're saying, what I'm hearing is we now have this new generation of parents, lots of millennials, and I don't know when they're going to become the dominant parent population, but I can't be that far out. It's going to happen pretty soon.
Yeah, the
Um,
shifting's starting to happen now.
yeah, I remember when I was eating it, we were seeing it, like seeing pretty dramatic shifts in not a lot of time. Um, so I guess what my long-winded thing here is usually I apologize, I'm going a little long here, but they they want to see stories like it's not
Mhm.
it's less about the stats, it's more about how are you show me how your kids are aligning with our values. And it makes perfect sense. Like if you look at the rise of the different social platforms, Instagram, TikTok, like you have all these creators who are like opening the door into their lives and telling stories about how they're living their lives, no matter how manufactured they may be, like whatever you think about it. But the reason it tends to resonate is because people can see themselves in them.
Yeah.
There's like aspiration, there's hope. And I think that's a real opportunity for schools, is to shift their storytelling to kind of tell, to really kind of show what the impact that they're having with their students versus, kind of some of the stats-based stuff. Now, you still need to do the stats-based stuff, but I think that there is opportunity to get deeper into the storytelling side.
I totally agree. I think part of this dynamic too is that for older generations, Gen Xers, for baby boomers, the outcomes were really what they were looking for because it was very linear trajectory, right? You went to a great school, you went to a great college, you got a great job. And millennials are, I think, the most educated generation in history, and yet financially are not as successful as previous generations. And so, especially now that we see more and more uncertainty in the culture at large, people are asking questions like, is doesn't seem to be quite such a linear trajectory. So is this worth the investment if I don't know that this great college is what my kids are going to go to? People are having a harder time envisioning what 10 or 15 years down the road is going to look like. But that's what schools are asking them to do, right? When you come into preschool admissions with a 3-year-old, or even if you're entering at a middle school at the 6th grader, and you're saying, we're basically betting on the next 10 years that you know better than we do as parents what to expect. And I think a lot of people are just questioning that. They're just not sure. And so they're thinking a lot more about the whole child. What are the values that are important? What are the thinking skills? And to me, that makes sense, right? Because we're in these unprecedented times where none of us have experienced firsthand what we're all going through. So rather than rely on experience, we have to rely on competencies, resilience, critical thinking, trust, empathy. That's sort of what we have. So I think it makes sense in the general landscape that parents are really questioning the value proposition of schools. And like you said, if schools don't have the ability to tell their story and clearly articulate their value proposition, families pick up on that quick.
Yeah, I mean, you said it way better than I did, so thank you. That was great. I mean, I'm like, I wish I had said it like that.
Thank you.
Um, I want to kind of take a step back and look at strategy as a concept for just a second. And I know, like in our world, we do a lot of strategic planning. Like that's just a kind of a normalized thing that schools do. But, there is a difference between strategic planning and strategy itself.
hmm
So when you think about that, like how do you differentiate between the two, and specifically, like how do you use strategy to stay responsive to these signals?
Yeah. I think strategy is the big picture thinking of how we get from where we are now to where we get to the vision of where we want to go. And that can look different for a lot of schools, but um, your strategic plan is a document, right? And in many cases, it's a document that you must provide for accreditation. Most of the schools that we see have strategic plans that look pretty similar. They have the same similar pillars, they cover the same basic ideas. But they don't really get into the uniqueness of where we are and where we want to go. And you and I have both seen that schools take a variety of approaches towards how they execute or don't their strategic plans, everywhere from the coffee table strategic plan that we have no intention to actually use as a transformation guide to this is our living, breathing guide that we bring out in every single meeting and everything in between.
Yep.
But strategy has to be responsive, right? That strategy is more than just your strategic plan. And it has to be the thing that sets you apart from everybody else. It can't be a document that, if you were to lay 4 out, you couldn't distinguish which schools was which. Otherwise, it won't do its intended purpose. And I think, like we've talked about, there are more demands on schools, so they need to be more strategic and they need more process and not just a static document.
So let's kind of unpack that just a little bit more. Assuming people are listening are like, yeah, Ann Marsh spot on. Like I want to get there, right? What are some practical things or habits that they can create that allows them to be more strategic and maybe feel a little less overwhelmed by the daily demands?
hmm Well, at SAIS, we've just started doing the blueprint sprints, which are all about bringing more time for strategy in the face of daily demands. So we, Brett and I, take the participant schools, their leadership teams that are there, through a process that's helping them go from a core strategic challenge to a place where they've got a long range and a 90-day implementation plan that's really scaffolded down that they can execute, that they can take back with, tools for how they start implementing immediately. That's one way that we're doing it for our member schools or non-members if they want to join us. But, you know, as you and I have talked about many times, you need an operating system. If you really want to implement your strategic plan, you've got to have a way to bring it in with intention to your meetings. You've got to have strategy built into each of your day-to-day connection points with the people who are going to be bringing them to life for your community. So I can't just sit on the back burner for a year or two and then we realize that it's time for our self study and we bring it back up. But you break it down. What's the 3 year? What's the 1 year? What's each of our 90-day cycles going to look like? Who owns which tasks? How do they build to the bigger whole? And then how do we meet with purpose to make sure that we're on track and get good feedback or iron out issues or pivot if we need to, or, reprioritize based on new context, but it's got to be part of the day to day.
Yeah, you just laid out everything I believe. So thank you. I
This
appreciate
is exactly why you're in
that.
business.
But what's so interesting is that if you do all those things with each weekly meeting that you have, I'm assuming everybody who's listening is their school has a leadership team meeting. Maybe it's 60 minutes, maybe it's 90 minutes, whatever the time domain is. It's you've got something, right? I like to say that every time you come out of that meeting, you have to have taken a couple steps closer to your strategic vision.
hmm
I can't overemphasize how important the way you meet, ensures your ability to get things done.
Absolutely. And I think in close combination with that is the power of the shared language and the shared norms that you reinforce when you meet with intention like that. Every time you're thinking about the language that you want to cascade for out of your leadership team into your faculty, into your parent community, and all of that strengthens the clarity. I've told you this before, but I believe it so strongly. If you don't tell your families and your faculty without a doubt, frequently, all the time, who you are and what you stand for, they all get to decide for themselves. And that just isn't an environment that builds
Yeah.
trust. You have to be in front of that, guiding a clear vision and telling people what the vision is. And when you meet with purpose like that, you just reinforce the strength of that vision.
So imagine, as we begin to wrap up here, imagine if I were head calling you today and saying, "And Marsh, like, what signals should I be paying closest attention to over the next 5 or 10 years, that could really have significant impact on reshaping my strategy?" What would you tell them?
Hmm. Okay, so I think I want to say that as we start to see more and more retirements and also the majority of faculty attrition that we're seeing aside from retirement is in our 1 to 3 year teacher population, that we have to capitalize on our faculty value proposition, our employee value proposition, and make sure that we're attracting the kind of people and retaining the kind of people who are going to build momentum toward our vision. And I do think we have an opportunity, right? Like this isn't all doom and gloom. In fact, a lot of the data that we have from our SAIS motivation and engagement survey is showing that we can retain those younger teachers, but they need to see that they can trust their leaders. They need to feel that there's a clear sense of trust, and they need to understand that they have purpose. Educators know they're never going to make the most money in the world. They're not in it for that. And so the money thing is a distractor in a lot of cases. It is important. It certainly is. And if you're not on track in terms of faculty compensation, there are steps you can take to get there based on where your market is. But I think being able to latch on to shared purpose, to be able to have role clarity for educators, to be able to provide an environment where they feel like they belong and they're making a positive impact, that's what really keeps them. And in schools, we know our people are our product. So if we don't have great folks who are moving us with momentum towards our vision, then we're going to be left behind. So I think that's the biggest one. And it's within our control, right? There are things that we can do to attract and retain those folks. So that's what I would say.
And I think it builds off that we were just talking about a second ago in terms of having an operating system to clearly execute strategy, because part of the benefit of an operating system is it does create a sense of transparency and understanding.
Yep.
People know what you stand for. They know where you're moving. Like, you're going to be socializing that and creating that shared language as part of it. So I think that's really important. The other thing I'll mention is kind of a little bit of a promo for past podcast episodes. I've actually had probably 5 or 6 episodes in the library that talk about how do you increase your faculty value proposition. And you're right. Like, there are a lot of things that you can do that in some cases are definitely going to require investment, but in other cases, maybe not financial investment. So I would encourage folks to go back into the library. There's, like I said, 4, 5, 6 episodes back there that could be helpful. And Marsh, as we wrap up here, last question for you. If somebody wants to reach out and say, and Marsh, I was like, I need to have another conversation. How might they do that?
You can reach me by email, annmarsh@sais.org, through our website, but you can just send me an email and I would love to hear from you. Getting to work with our members and with other folks in the industry who care about this work, want to move them forward. I mean, those are really the things that's why I do what I do. You know, the projects are amazing, but it's the people and the sense of purpose and helping people move their strategy forward in their day-to-day, seeing the progress that is really in my heart. So reach out, email me, or through you. I think there's a link right through your advisor program that they can reach me as well, or on LinkedIn, anywhere. All the channels.
All the channels, all the ways. And Marsh Rutledge, Director of Strategic Design and Innovation at SAIS. Always so much fun. Thank you. Thank you again for sharing.
Thank you so much, Peter. Always a pleasure. I will look forward to seeing you another time.
Absolutely.